The rain had carved rivers down the windows of the old Victorian house, each drop a tiny echo of the storm that had raged inside Riley Harper for months. She stood frozen in the doorway, the scent of damp earth and pine from the backyard garden seeping in like an uninvited memory. "Come in, Riley," Evelyn's voice called from the living room, soft as the fog rolling off the Columbia River, but laced with a warmth that made Riley's chest ache, because it was the kind of invitation she hadn't heard since her own mother stopped speaking altogether. Riley stepped inside, her boots leaving faint mud prints on the worn oak floors, each one a betrayal of the chaos she carried. The house, perched on a quiet street in southeast Portland, felt like a relic from another life, June's life. Her best friend who had vanished into the haze of a semester abroad, leaving Riley adrift in a city that suddenly felt too vast, too indifferent. Evelyn, June's mother, moved like a shadow in the dim light, her silver-streaked auburn hair pulled into a loose bun, strands escaping like whispers of forgotten summers. At 48, she carried the graceful lines of a woman who had weathered more than her share of Pacific Northwest storms, her green eyes holding the steady depth of the evergreens that lined the hills beyond. It had started with a simple text weeks ago, when Riley's world had cracked open wider than she could bear. "Evelyn, June mentioned you have a knack for colors. The house feels too empty without her. Could you help me decorate the guest room? Just strings of lights, maybe some shelves. Nothing fancy." Riley had stared at the screen until the words blurred, her thumb hovering over delete. What did she know about decorating? She could barely keep her own apartment from resembling a shipwreck. Boxes of her father's old letters stacked in corners, photos of her mother tucked away like guilty secrets. But the emptiness Evelyn described mirrored her own so perfectly that Riley had replied yes, because saying no would have meant admitting she was unraveling. Now, as Evelyn handed her a mug of chamomile tea, steam rising like fragile hopes, Riley felt the first tremor of exposure. The living room was a museum of June's childhood. Faded Polaroids pinned to a corkboard, a bookshelf sagging under dog-eared copies of The Secret Garden and dog training manuals, June's eternal dream of fostering strays. Riley's fingers tightened around the mug. She had come here so many times as a teenager, crashing on the couch after late-night drives along the waterfront, June's laughter filling the spaces where Riley's silences grew. But that was before the accident, before the call from the hospital in Eugene, before her mother's hands went limp in hers, whispering apologies that dissolved into the beeps of machines. "You're quieter than I remember," Evelyn said, settling onto the edge of the velvet armchair, her knees brushing the frayed hem of her linen skirt. She didn't push, didn't fill the air with platitudes about time healing all. Instead, she waited, her gaze tracing the rain-streaked window as if the answers lay in the blurred outline of Mount Hood in the distance. Riley swallowed, the tea bitter on her tongue. It's been a long year. Understatement of the century. The year her mother had confessed the affair that shattered their family. The one that drove her father away to some anonymous job in Seattle, leaving Riley to navigate the wreckage alone. The guilt that followed. Why hadn't she seen it? Why hadn't she fought harder for the threads holding them together? It coiled in her gut like the Willamette's undercurrent, pulling her under whenever she surfaced for air. Evelyn nodded, her fingers absently tracing the arm of the chair, where a faint scar from a long-ago gardening mishap etched the wood like a map of small battles. "Grief does that. It turns words to stones." She paused, her voice dropping to the rhythm of the rain. "June used to say you were the one who saw the colors in everything. The way the sunset hits the bridges just right, turning rust to gold." Riley's throat tightened. June had said that, sprawled on this very rug during one of their endless sleepovers, passing a bottle of cheap wine between them as they dreamed of escaping Portland's gray for brighter coasts. But now June was in Barcelona, chasing architecture and freedom, while Riley drowned in the gray. "I don't feel very colorful these days." The older woman rose then, crossing to a cardboard box tucked beside the fireplace, its lid half open like an invitation to secrets. Inside lay skeins of yarn in muted earth tones, sage, terracotta, midnight blue, and coils of fairy lights, their tiny bulbs dormant as winter seeds. "Then let's start small," Evelyn murmured, pulling out a strand of lights. "Just enough to chase the shadows from one room." Riley followed her up the narrow staircase, the wood creaking underfoot like old bones settling into truth. The guest room overlooked the backyard, where rhododendrons bowed under the downpour, their blooms bruised purple against the fence. It was a space frozen in time. A quilt Evelyn's mother had stitched draped over the bed, yellowed lace curtains filtering the light into something soft and forgiving. As they unpacked the box, Riley's hands moved on autopilot, draping lights along the headboard, their glow flickering to life like hesitant fireflies. Evelyn watched her, not with pity, but with a quiet recognition that made Riley's skin prickle. "You know," she said, kneeling to sort the yarns, "after David left, June's father, it was this room that saved me. I'd sit here at night, listening to the river, piecing together Afghans that went nowhere. But the act of it tethered me." Riley paused, a bulb warm in her palm. David, the man who had packed his bags one rainy April morning, citing the monotony of Portland's cycles as his excuse, leaving Evelyn to raise June alone amid the craft shows and community theater rehearsals. Riley had been 16 then, witnessing the quiet fracture from the sidelines, June's tears soaking her shoulder as they hid in the attic. "I didn't know it hit you that hard." A soft laugh escaped Evelyn, tinged with the rustle of leaves and wind. "We all carry our fractures differently. Mine showed in the way I overwatered the ferns until they wilted. Yours?" She trailed off, her eyes meeting Riley's with a depth that stripped away pretense. "Yours glows in the way you hold back, like you're afraid the light will burn." The words landed like rain on parched earth, soaking through the barriers Riley had built. She wanted to argue, to say it was just exhaustion, just the weight of unpaid bills and unanswered calls from her father. But as the lights began to weave their golden web across the walls, casting flecks of warmth on Evelyn's face, Riley felt the first crack in her armor, a sliver of light piercing the dark. They worked in companionable silence for hours, the storm outside easing to a drizzle that pattered like distant applause. Evelyn shared stories in fragments, the time she and David had danced under these very eaves during a summer solstice party, fireflies mimicking the strings they now hung, the way June at 8 had declared this room her fortress of solitude, complete with a sign made from popsicle sticks. Riley listened, her own words emerging haltingly, tales of her mother's laughter in the kitchen, baking scones that filled their cramped apartment with vanilla and promise, before the confessions turned it all to ash. By dusk the room transformed. Shelves lined with June's old sketchbooks, yarns draped like vines over the window seat, lights pulsing softly against the twilight. Evelyn stepped back, wiping her hands on her skirt, a faint flush coloring her cheeks. "It's beautiful. Thank you, Riley." Riley shrugged, but the warmth in her chest betrayed her. "It was nothing. It was everything," Evelyn replied, her voice a bridge across the years between them. And in that moment, as the first stars pricked the indigo sky over Portland, Riley wondered if perhaps, just perhaps, the nothing she had given was the beginning of something vast. The drive home that evening blurred into a haze of sodium streetlights and the low hum of the radio, playing some indie folk tune about lost rivers finding their way back to the sea. Riley gripped the wheel tighter than necessary, her knuckles pale against the fading glow of Evelyn's porch light in the rearview. The house had felt alive under their hands, but now, alone in her beat-up Subaru, the weight returned, doubled somehow by the intimacy of shared silences. She pulled over near the steel bridge, the Willamette churning black below, its surface rippling with reflections of the city skyline like fractured memories. Sleep evaded her that night, the apartment's thin walls amplifying every creak, every distant siren wailing through the Hawthorne district. She lay on her unmade bed, staring at the ceiling where water stains bloomed like ink blots of doubt. Why had Evelyn's words lingered like smoke? "Yours glows in the way you hold back." It was too perceptive, too close to the bone, stirring the embers of a shame Riley had buried deep. Shame for failing her mother in those final weeks, for the arguments that escalated into slammed doors and unspoken accusations. "You always take his side," her mother had hurled once, voice cracking like thunder over the Cascades, referring to the father who had chosen silence over salvage. Riley hadn't taken sides. She had simply frozen, a deer in the headlights of their unraveling, and in that paralysis she had lost them both. Morning brought no clarity, only a voicemail from her father's number, brief as always, checking in. "Weather's holding in Seattle. Call if you need." She deleted it without listening fully, the habit as automatic as breathing. Instead she texted June, fingers flying over the screen in a bid for normalcy. "Helped your mom with the guest room. Looks amazing. Miss you." The reply came swift, peppered with emojis. "OMG, tell her I love the yarn idea. You're the best. Barcelona's wild, wish you were here." Riley smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. June's world was vibrant, unscarred. Riley's felt like a sketch half erased. By afternoon, the invitation to return gnawed at her. Evelyn had slipped a note into her jacket pocket as she left. If you're free Saturday, the backyard needs taming. Vines everywhere. Bring gloves. It was innocuous, a neighborly ask, but Riley's pulse quickened at the thought. She shouldn't go, shouldn't tether herself to a house that echoed with echoes of her own fractures. Yet, as she wandered the Saturday market along the waterfront, the stalls bursting with artisanal cheeses and hand-thrown pottery, the pull grew undeniable. Portland in autumn was a symphony of decay and renewal. Pumpkins piled like amber suns, leaves drifting on the breeze like confetti from a bittersweet parade. She bought a bundle of dried lavender, its scent sharp and soothing, telling herself it was for the garden, not for the woman tending it. Evelyn was waiting when Riley arrived, knee-deep in the overgrown tangle behind the house, her sundress smudged with soil, hair escaping its braid in wild curls. The backyard sloped gently toward a creek that fed into the Willamette, wild blackberries choking the fence in thorny abundance. "You came," Evelyn said, straightening with a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes, handing Riley a pair of shears. No questions, no probing. Just the simple joy of shared labor. They clipped and pulled in the dappled light filtering through the maples, the air thick with the tang of wet earth and crushed herbs. Evelyn moved with an effortless grace, her hands sure as she unearthed perennials buried under weeds. Hostas with leaves like elephant ears, astilbe nodding in feathery pinks. Riley followed suit, her cuts less precise, but the rhythm soothed her frayed nerves. It was meditative, this reclaiming, snipping away the overgrowth to reveal what lay beneath, much like the therapy session she had abandoned after 3 visits, deeming them too exposing. As the sun climbed, they paused on the weathered picnic bench, sharing slices of quiche Evelyn had baked that morning, its crust flaky with rosemary. David hated gardening, Evelyn confessed, her fork pausing mid-air. Said it was too unpredictable, all that dirt under your nails for blooms that might not come. She laughed softly, but her eyes held a shadow, the kind that spoke of nights spent alone with the soil as her confidant. Riley nodded, picking at a blackberry stain on her jeans. My dad was the opposite. He planted tulips in our tiny yard back in the day. Red ones like flames. But after everything they just withered. I couldn't bring myself to dig them up. The admission slipped out unbidden, raw as the thorn prick on her thumb. She hadn't spoken of the tulips to anyone, not even June. Evelyn's gaze softened, not with sympathy, but with the quiet solidarity of someone who knew the terrain. Sometimes the digging is the hardest part, but leave them too long and they choke everything else. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing Riley's in a gesture so fleeting it might have been accidental, yet it lingered, a spark against the cool autumn air. The afternoon unfolded in layers. They strung hammocks between the oaks, their laughter rising when Riley tangled the ropes, Evelyn's hand steadying hers with a touch that felt like anchoring. Stories flowed freer now, Evelyn recounting June's toddler tantrums over mud pies, Riley sharing the secret fort she and her mother built in the underbrush of Forest Park, complete with twig thrones and acorn crowns. But beneath the lightness, fractures surfaced. Evelyn spoke of the years after David's departure, the community theater where she found solace in roles that let her wear other skins. The fierce widow in our town, the resilient mother in Steel Magnolias. Acting let me forgive him in a way, she said, voice threading through the rustle of leaves. Not for leaving but for showing me I could stand alone. Riley envied that forgiveness, a foreign country she longed to visit. I can't even forgive myself, she whispered, the words escaping as she tied off a vine. For not seeing how bad it was with my mom. The signs were there, the late nights, the whispers. Thought it was just life. Evelyn set down her shears, turning to face her fully. The sun caught the silver in her hair, turning it to threads of light. Forgiveness isn't a switch, Riley. It's a garden. You weed a little each day, water what grows. Her hand found Riley's again, this time deliberate, thumb tracing a gentle circle over her knuckles. The touch was maternal, yet something else stirred in its wake. A current, subtle as the creek's murmur, hinting at depths unexplored. Dusk fell early, painting the sky in bruised purples and golds. They lit the fire pit Evelyn had built years ago from river stones, flames leaping like tentative confessions. Riley stayed longer than planned, the warmth drawing out more. The ache of her mother's final letter slipped under her door days after the hospital, apologizing for the lies that had poisoned their air. Evelyn listened without interruption, her presence a balm, until the stars wheeled overhead and Riley's eyelids grew heavy. As she gathered her things, Evelyn pressed the lavender bundle into her hands. For your apartment. To remember this isn't all thorns. Driving away, the city lights smeared into constellations, Riley's heart a tangle of vines, some choking, others reaching for sun. The touch lingered on her skin, a question forming in the quiet. What if the garden they tended was more than backyard soil? What if it was the soil of souls, fertile with possibilities she had long deemed barren? But doubt crept in with the night, whispering of boundaries crossed, of roles blurred. Evelyn was June's mother, a woman twice her years, anchored in a life Riley only glimpsed. To entertain more felt like trespass, a betrayal of the platonic harbor she had sought. Yet, as she parked outside her building, the lavender scent filling the car, Riley couldn't shake the bloom of hope, or the fear that it too might wither if not carefully nurtured. Weeks blurred into a rhythm Riley hadn't known she craved. Saturdays in Evelyn's garden, evolving from vine taming to ambitious plots of native wildflowers, lupins and foxgloves that promised bursts of violet against the spring thaw. Portland's rains softened to intermittent showers, the air crisp with the promise of renewal, mirroring the tentative thaw in Riley's guarded heart. She arrived each time with excuses, seeds from the co-op, a borrowed trowel, but the truth hummed beneath. The pull of Evelyn's steady presence, the way her laughter peeled back layers of Riley's isolation like sun on frost. One such Saturday, as they knelt side by side in the loamy earth, Evelyn unearthed a cluster of crocuses, their petals unfurling like purple secrets. Look at these, she marveled, holding one up to the light filtering through the arborvitae. Buried all winter, thinking the cold was forever. Then bloom. Her voice carried a lilt, reminiscent of the folk songs she hummed while weeding, tunes from her youth in rural Oregon, where the Siuslaw River wound through her childhood like a silver thread. Riley paused, dirt caking her nails, watching the way Evelyn's fingers cradled the flower. Gentle, reverent, as if it held the weight of worlds. You make it sound easy, she said, her tone lighter than intended, laced with the ease that had settled between them like morning mist. Evelyn's eyes met hers, green as the moss-cloaked stones lining the creek bed. It's not. But you've got that in you, Riley. I see it, the way you listen, really listen. June always said you were her anchor. The mention of June twisted something in Riley's chest, a reminder of the invisible line they towed. June's texts had grown sporadic, filled with tales of gaudiest whimsy and late-night tapas, oblivious to the undercurrents in the house she had left behind. Riley had replied with half-truths, gardens thriving. Your mom's a force. But omission bred unease, a quiet erosion like the creek nibbling at its banks. That unease crested that afternoon, as thunder rumbled distant over the coast range, scattering them into the kitchen for shelter. Evelyn brewed coffee strong as the storm's edge, the aroma mingling with the cinnamon of snickerdoodles cooling on the rack. A recipe passed from her own mother, baked in times of trouble. They sat at the scarred pine table, rain lashing the panes, and the conversation veered, as it often did now, into deeper waters. Tell me about her, Evelyn prompted, stirring cream into her mug with absent swirls. Your mother. Not the ending, the beginning. Riley hesitated, the steam from her cup rising like ghosts. The beginning was a sun-dappled memory. Her mother, young and fierce, with hair like autumn maple, chasing her through the rose gardens of Washington Park, their laughter echoing off the Japanese maples. She was alive, Riley said finally, the word inadequate yet true. Taught me to read palms in the dirt. Said every line told a story if you looked close enough. We'd lie on the grass, tracing constellations in the clouds, naming them after our dreams. Evelyn leaned forward, elbows on the table, her undivided attention a mirror reflecting Riley's vulnerability. Sounds like poetry. It was. Riley's voice cracked, the storm outside mirroring the one within. Until the poetry turned to prose, bills, arguments, the slow fade. And then the secret she kept, the one that blew it all apart. The words tumbled now, unfiltered. The affair with the neighbor, the years of quiet deception, the way it hollowed her mother from the vibrant woman of those cloud-naming days to a shadow pleading for understanding in a hospital bed. Evelyn didn't flinch, didn't offer empty consolations. Instead, she reached across the table, her hand enveloping Riley's in a grasp that was firm, grounding. "Secrets are thieves," she said softly, her thumb stroking the back of Riley's hand in slow, soothing arcs. "They steal the light. But sharing them? That's reclaiming it." The touch ignited something. A spark that leaped from skin to soul, warming the chill Riley had carried like a second skin. She didn't pull away. Couldn't, as if Evelyn's hand were the tether keeping her from the storm's full fury. Their eyes locked, the kitchen shrinking to the space between them, charged with an electricity born of shared wounds. Evelyn's face, softened by the lamplight, held a beauty Riley had glimpsed in stolen moments. The curve of her jaw, the faint freckles across her nose from summers past, the wisdom etched in laugh lines that spoke of joys reclaimed. Thunder rolled closer, shaking the windows, and Evelyn rose, drawing Riley with her to the living room where the fairy lights still twinkled in the guest room doorway. "Dance with me," she said, not a question, extending her hand as the radio crackled to life with a slow jazz number, Ella Fitzgerald's voice weaving through the rain like silk. Riley's heart stuttered. This was uncharted, a step beyond the platonic dance of weeding and wiring. But the pull was magnetic, Evelyn's body swaying into hers with a familiarity that belied the years between them. They moved in the half-light, Evelyn's hand at the small of Riley's back, guiding without demanding, their breaths sinking to the melody. It was innocent yet profound. The press of cheek to shoulder, the shared warmth against the chill seeping through the floorboards. "I shouldn't," Riley murmured as the song faded, her forehead resting against Evelyn's collarbone, inhaling the scent of earth and lavender that clung to her skin. "Shouldn't what?" Evelyn whispered, her fingers threading lightly through Riley's hair, a caress that trembled with its own uncertainty. "Feel this." The admission hung heavy, laced with the fear of naming it, of the age gap, the tangled ties to June, the fragility of her own healing heart. Evelyn pulled back just enough to search her face, her expression a tapestry of tenderness and resolve. "Feelings aren't debts, Riley. They're seeds. We decide what grows." The storm broke then, sheets of rain blurring the world outside, but inside clarity dawned. Riley leaned in, her lips brushing Evelyn's in a kiss tentative as crocus petals, soft, seeking, a question posed in the language of touch. Evelyn responded with a sigh that was answer enough, her arms encircling Riley as if she had been waiting lifetimes for this bloom. They parted breathless, foreheads touching, the jazz crooning on. It wasn't passion's fire, but embers, warm, sustaining, promising light after long dark. Yet as Riley drove home through the deluge, the wipers slashing arcs of clarity, doubt shadowed the glow. What of June? What of the worlds they inhabited, so disparate yet intertwined? The seed had taken root, but gardens demanded care, and Riley wondered if she had the strength to tend it without uprooting all she held dear. The kiss lingered like the aftertaste of rain-kissed earth, sweet and inevitable, reshaping the landscape of Riley's days. She returned to Evelyn's not with trepidation, but with a quiet hunger, for the stolen moments in the garden, where their hands brushed over trowels and their glances held promises, for the evenings that stretched into nights, coffee giving way to wine on the porch swing, conversations delving into the marrow of souls. Portland spring unfolded in tandem, cherry blossoms drifting like pink confetti along the streets, the Willamette swelling with meltwater from the mountains, mirroring the swell in Riley's chest, a tide of feeling she had long denied. Evelyn became her compass, navigating the fog of Riley's grief with stories that illuminated hidden paths. Over breakfasts of poached eggs and sourdough from the corner bakery, she spoke of her own unraveling after David's departure, not the anger, but the hollow echo of a love that had curdled into habit. "I thought I was broken," she confessed one misty morning, the kitchen filled with the steam of French press and the trill of robins outside. "But breaking lets the light in, doesn't it? Through the cracks." Riley absorbed it like sunlight on upturned soil, her own confessions flowering in response. She shared the letters from her father, yellowed missives from his early days in Seattle, filled with blueprints of bridges he designed, structures meant to connect, yet underscoring his absence. "He builds ways across chasms," she said, unfolding one on the table, the paper crinkling like dry leaves. "But he couldn't build one back to us." Evelyn's fingers traced the inked lines, her touch a silent vow. "You are not adrift." Their connection deepened in layers like the strata of the Columbia Gorge they hiked one Sunday, the trail winding through basalt cliffs veined with waterfalls. Evelyn led the way, her pack slung low, pointing out trillium blooming white against the ferns. Symbols of the Trinity, she explained. But I like to think of them as reminders. Body, mind, spirit, all intertwined. Riley followed, her steps lighter, the physicality of the climb mirroring the emotional ascent. At the overlook, wind whipping their hair, Evelyn turned to her, cupping Riley's face in hands still scented with trail dust. Their kiss there was bolder, infused with the wildness of the place. Lips parting under the roar of Multnomah Falls, bodies pressing close against the chill gusts. Yet harmony bred its shadows. June's return loomed, her flight landing in 2 weeks, texts buzzing with excitement. Can't wait to see the garden. Mom says you're a wizard. Guilt gnawed at Riley, a vine twisting through her joy. How to confess this? To the friend who had been her sister, to the mother who had become her harbor. She broached it one twilight evening. As they sat on the backyard bench, fireflies winking like errant stars. The air hummed with crickets, the creak a silver ribbon in the fading light. Evelyn, Riley began, her voice threading the dusk. June's coming home. And us. This. It's beautiful, but what if it breaks her world? Evelyn's hand stilled in hers, the older woman's gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun dipped behind the west hills, gilding the clouds in rose and amber. Silence stretched, heavy as the gathering dew, until she spoke, measured and true. June's world was never ours to break, Riley. She's grown into her own light. But I won't lie, this scares me too. The judgment, the questions. I've lived half my life in the gray areas after David, wondering if love could fit the shapes we make. Riley's heart clenched, the vulnerability in Evelyn's tone a mirror to her own. I don't want to lose her. Or you. You won't lose me. Evelyn turned then, her eyes fierce with the clarity of mountain streams. But understanding, that's the bridge we build together. Talk to her when the time feels right. Honesty is the root that holds. Emboldened, Riley reached for her phone, drafting a message to June under Evelyn's watchful eye. Hey, I've been spending time with your mom. A lot. It's more than gardening. Can we talk when you're back? She hit send before doubt could reclaim her, the whoosh echoing in the quiet like a stone skipped across water. June's reply came swift, a cascade of voice notes. Confusion first, laced with surprise. Wait, what? Mom? Like, romantically. Then probing questions gentle as probing roots. By the third note her tone shifted to warmth, tentative but real. Riley, your family. This makes you happy and her. I just want details over tacos. Promise no drama. Laughter bubbled through the static, a release that loosened the knot in Riley's chest. Evelyn pulled her close as the fireflies danced, their embrace a sanctuary. See? Seeds take time but they grow toward the sun. The days that followed were a tapestry of understanding. June's arrival a whirlwind of hugs and airport runs, her stories of Spain spilling over dinner at Evelyn's table. Paella attempts gone awry, midnight sketches of Sagrada Familia. Riley watched mother and daughter reconnect, the ease between them a balm, and when June pulled her aside later, under the arbor strung with lights, her words were a gift. I see it in you both, the way you light up. It's weird, yeah, but love's not supposed to fit neat boxes. Just be gentle with her heart. And mine if it comes to it. Tears pricked Riley's eyes, the forgiveness unspoken yet profound. A mending of threads she had feared severed. That night as June crashed in the guest room, Riley and Evelyn slipped away to the porch, hands entwined, the city lights twinkling like affirmations. The conversation flowed into the small hours, dreams deferred, like Evelyn's abandoned novel about women reclaiming rivers. Riley's quiet aspiration to illustrate children's books, capturing the wild magic of Oregon's wilds. Understanding wove them tighter, the Thursday emerging not as erasure, but as acceptance, the scars of past loves, the ghosts of departures, honored yet released. In the hush before dawn, as mist rose from the creek like veils lifted, Riley felt the first true stirrings of forgiveness, for her mother, whose secrets had been chains born of her own fears, for her father, whose bridges spanned distances too vast for one man, for herself, the girl who had frozen instead of fighting. Evelyn's kiss, soft against her temple, sealed it. We're here now. That's the rebirth. Summer arrived in Portland like a long-held breath released, the Willamette shimmering under relentless blue skies, bridges arching like veins of steel and promise. Riley's life, once a monochrome sketch, bloomed in vivid strokes. Morning sketching at the kitchen table while Evelyn brewed pour-overs, her presence a steady orbit. Afternoons exploring the city's hidden veins, the secret beer gardens of Alberta Arts, the wildflower meadows of Tryon Creek, where they picnicked on cheese and figs, feet tangled in grass. Their love unfolded not in grand gestures, but in the poetry of the everyday. Evelyn's handwritten notes tucked into Riley's sketchbook, quoting Mary Oliver. "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" Prompting Riley to fill pages with illustrations of women dancing in starlit forests, their forms intertwined like ivy and oak. Yet rebirth was no straight path. It wound through valleys of doubt, where old wounds festered under the sun's glare. Riley's father called one sweltering July evening, his voice crackling over the line from Seattle, inviting her north for a weekend, to see the new span over the Sound. "Thought you might sketch it." The offer dangled like a lifeline laced with barbs, stirring the sediment of resentment she had only begun to settle. Evelyn sensed the turmoil that night, as they walked the sandy river trail, the water rushing clear over polished stones, her hand squeezing Riley's in silent query. "He's reaching out," Riley said finally, skipping a pebble across the current, watching it sink with a plop. "After all this time, part of me wants to go, to hear whatever apology he's bottled up. The other part fears it'll just reopen the floodgates." Evelyn nodded, her bare feet sinking into the cool gravel of the riverbed, toes curling against the chill. Rebirth doesn't mean erasing the past, love. It means choosing which floods to ford. She drew Riley into the shallows, the water lapping at their ankles, cold and cleansing. "Go if your heart pulls you. I'll be here, holding the lantern." Emboldened by her faith, Riley drove north the next dawn, the I-5 corridor unfolding in fields of sunflowers nodding like golden sentinels. Seattle greeted her with its marine layer, the Space Needle piercing the clouds like a question mark. Her father waited at a harborside cafe, older than memory, hair thin to silver, hands veined like the bridges he built, eyes holding the same hazel as hers, shadowed by regret. They walked the waterfront, words emerging haltingly. His isolation after the divorce, the work that became escape, the letters he sent but never followed with calls. "I thought space would heal us," he admitted, voice rough as tide-scoured barnacles. "But space just echoes." Riley listened, the salt wind stinging her cheeks, and when the tears came they were not storm but spring rain, washing clean the silt of years. "It wasn't just space, Dad. It was silence." Her voice held no accusation, only truth, and in his nod, the quiet embrace that followed, she glimpsed the man he might have been, the father she could reclaim in fragments. The drive south was lighter, the Olympics receding in the mirror like burdens shed. Evelyn met her at the door with arms open, listening as Riley recounted the bridge tour, the faltering dinner of salmon and stories. "He showed me his sketches," Riley said, curling into Evelyn's side on the couch, the room aglow with sunset through the lace curtains. "Not just steel, people crossing, hands linked. Said it reminded him of us before." Evelyn's fingers combed through her hair, a rhythm as steady as heartbeat. "And you? What did it remind you of?" "Forgiving the builder, maybe. Or building my own bridges." She tilted her head, meeting Evelyn's gaze, the green depths reflecting back a woman reborn. Not flawless but whole. Their kiss deepened there, slow and savoring, bodies aligning on the cushions like puzzle pieces long separated. It was intimacy woven from trust, whispers of gratitude against skin, explorations gentle as river currents, reaffirming that love was the ultimate reconstruction. June, ever the bridge herself, woven seamlessly, joining them for bonfires in the backyard where stories crackled like the flames. Her travels, Riley's illustrations gaining traction at local galleries, Evelyn's decision to dust off that novel, chapters unfolding on quiet afternoons. One night, as sparks ascended into the starry vault, June raised her glass of cider, eyes twinkling. "To the women who rebuild. From ashes, from soil, from each other." Tears welled in Riley's eyes, the circle of their hands a talisman against lingering shadows. Her mother's absence echoed less sharply now, transmuted into lessons, the wildness of love, the courage of secrets shared. She began writing letters back to her father, not of reconciliation forced, but of paths parallel, hers in Portland's embrace, his in Seattle's fog, intersecting at holidays, at bridges both literal and metaphorical. Evelyn's influence rippled outward too. Community workshops on fiber arts, where Riley assisted, teaching not tying to wide-eyed teens, the act a metaphor for binding loose ends. In these spaces Riley felt her rebirth solidify. Not a sudden phoenix rise, but a gradual unfurling, petal by petal, under the sun of love's patient gaze. As August waned, they escaped to the Oregon coast, renting a cottage in Cannon Beach where the haystack rock loomed like a sentinel of tides. They walked the sands at low tide, barefoot in the foam, collecting agates polished smooth by relentless waves, symbols of time's gentle erosion. Evelyn pressed one into Riley's palm, cool and iridescent. "Like us," she murmured, the crash of surf underscoring her words. Tumbled but translucent in the light. Riley pulled her close, salt on their lips, the horizon endless. In that moment, she was no longer the girl adrift in grief's current. She was the current itself, flowing, carving canyons of joy from stone. Autumn returned to Portland with a painter's palette. Maples aflame along the Banfield, pumpkins heaped at farm stands like harvest moons, the air crisp with cider and wood smoke. Riley's rebirth crested in these colors, a symphony of closure and commencement that painted her days with unshadowed light. Her illustrations, once solitary sketches in the margins of grief, now filled a debut chapbook, Rivers reclaimed. Its cover a watercolor of the Willamette at dawn, bridges linking shadowed banks. Evelyn had been there for every stroke, her quiet encouragements the wind filling Riley's sails. Late nights in the studio Evelyn had converted from the attic, surrounded by bolts of fabric and jars of pigment, their laughter mingling with the scratch of charcoal. The launch reading at Powell's City of Books was a revelation. Rows of folding chairs filled with familiar faces, June in the front row beaming like a proud sibling, local artists nodding in recognition, even her father flown down from Seattle, his presence a quiet milestone. Riley stood at the podium, voice steady as she read from the crossing. "We are not the storms that break us, but the light that follows, the tentative rays piercing cloud, illuminating paths we thought lost." Her eyes found Evelyn in the crowd, seated with hands clasped, green gaze a beacon, and the words flowed freer, infused with the truth of their shared forging. Applause washed over her like warm rain, but it was Evelyn's embrace afterward, in the shadowed stacks that grounded her. "You shone, Riley. Like you were born for this." Their kiss there amid the scent of ink and aged paper was a vow renewed, passionate yet tender, a celebration of souls aligned. Forgiveness, that elusive bloom, fully flowered in the weeks that followed. Riley visited her mother's grave in Lone Fir Cemetery, the plot shaded by ancient cedars, leaves drifting like offerings. She brought a bouquet of asters, Evelyn's favorites, purple as twilight, and sat cross-legged on the grass, the earth cool beneath her. "I see you now, Mom," she whispered, tracing the etched name on the stone. "The woman who chased dreams too fiercely, who loved in tempests. I forgive the storms, and myself for weathering them." Wind stirred the branches overhead, a susurrus-like absolution, and for the first time, Riley left without the hollow ache, carrying instead a lightness, a space for new plantings. Her father, too, stepped into this light. A joint trip to the gorge, the three of them, Riley, Evelyn and him, hiking Eagle Creek Trail, waterfalls veiling the path in mist. Conversation meandered like the stream. Bridges built and burned, regrets aired like laundry in the sun. He spoke of his own mother's passing, the guilt that mirrored Riley's, and in that shared vulnerability bonds reformed, not seamless but strong in their mending. Evelyn walked between them, her presence the mortar, her stories of resilience drawing parallels to the trail's resilient ferns, thriving in crevices. June, ever the catalyst, organized a harvest feast in the backyard as leaves turned, the table groaning under squash bisque and Evelyn's apple crostata. Friends gathered. Evelyn's theater troupe, Riley's artist circle, laughter rising like steam from tureens, toasts to kinships forged in fire. As dusk deepened, strings of lights ignited overhead, casting the garden in golden halo. June pulled Riley aside, her arm linking through hers. "You've become this radiant thing," she said, voice thick with emotion. "Mom too. Whatever you built, it's deeper than decoration. It's home." Riley hugged her fierce, the bond between them unbroken, enriched by honesty. "Could say the same for you. Barcelona's girl, bringing the world back to us." Winter's approach brought introspection. Cozy nights by the fireplace where Evelyn read drafts of her novel aloud, Riley illustrating passages with vignettes of women by rivers, hands outstretched in unity. Their love matured in these intimacies. Mornings waking entwined, the duvet a cocoon against frost-laced windows. Evenings strolling the waterfront, hot cocoa steaming in thermoses, Portland's skyline a constellation of resilience. Touches grew familiar. Evelyn's fingers mapping Riley's spine like constellations, Riley's head on Evelyn's lap as folk tunes played low, lyrics of wandering hearts finding harbor. One snow-dusted December eve, as flurries danced outside like errant fireflies, Evelyn knelt by the tree they had decorated together, ornaments from her childhood, Riley's hand-painted stars, and pulled a small box from her pocket. Inside lay a ring, simple silver etched with the winding river motif. Not a cage, she said, voice a hush against the crackle of logs, but a circle. To remind us, what flows together endures. Tears traced Riley's cheeks warm as the hearth glow, as she slipped it on, the metal cool then warming to her skin. Yes, she breathed, drawing Evelyn close, their foreheads touching in the light's embrace. To all the rivers we've crossed, and those yet to come. The year turned, solstice fires burning bright, and Riley stepped into the new dawn reborn. Not unscarred but illuminated. Grief's shadows lingered in quiet moments, a hoar frost on the soul, but they no longer defined her. She was the light after, the bloom from buried seed, loved into wholeness by a woman whose depths matched her own. In Evelyn's arms, in the circle of family reforged, Riley found not just survival but thriving. A life woven from threads of forgiveness, empathy, and the deepest love. The kind that rebuilds worlds one tender stroke at a time. And as spring whispered on the wind once more, crocuses pushing through the thawing earth, Riley knew the journey continued, endless, evolving, ever toward the sun. In the hush of early mornings, when Portland still slumbered under a veil of mist, Riley would slip from the warmth of their bed to the kitchen, where the first light slanted through the blinds like golden fingers beckoning. She brewed coffee strong and black, the percolators gurgle a soft symphony, and carried 2 mugs to the backyard, where Evelyn waited on the bench they had restored together. Its wood sanded smooth, painted in a hue of sage that echoed the returning greens. They sat shoulder to shoulder, steam curling between them, watching the creek awaken. Minnows darting like silver thoughts, birdsong threading the air with tentative joy. These rituals anchored Riley, a counterpoint to the vastness of her rebirth. The chapbook had sold modestly, enough for a window-ledge display at the bookstore, its pages turning in strangers' hands like quiet propagations. Gallery inquiries trickled in, a series on urban wilds, bridges as metaphors for connection, and Riley pursued them with a fervor born of purpose. Her studio now a shared sanctuary where Evelyn's yarns draped over easels, colors bleeding into inspiration. Yet success's glow carried undercurrents. The fear of impermanence, the echo of losses past whispering that all blooms fade. Evelyn sensed these tides, as she did all Riley's unspoken currents, drawing her into conversations that delved like roots into fertile dark. One such morning, as cherry petals rained from the neighbor's tree like fleeting confetti, she turned with a question soft as the breeze. What does light feel like to you now after the shadows? Riley sipped her coffee, the bitterness grounding her, gaze tracing the ring on her finger, its river etchings catching the sun. Warm, she said, after a pause rich with reflection. Not blinding but steady. Like this, like us. She leaned into Evelyn head on shoulder, inhaling the scent of sleep and lavender soap. But sometimes I wake with the old weight, dreaming of bridges collapsing, rivers running dry. Evelyn's arm encircled her, a harbor wall against the swell. Dreams are just echoes, love. The river runs on. Her voice held the timbre of her readings, the novel now complete. Tides of Return, a tale of women mending nets torn by storms, its pages bound with Riley's endpapers of inked waves. They had celebrated its submission with a picnic at the International Rose Test Garden. Petals carpeting the paths in crimson and blush, toasting with sparkling cider under arbors heavy with bloom. Family, too, evolved in this light. Her father's visits more frequent, dinners at Evelyn's table where he shared engineering tales, Evelyn countering with theater lore, laughter bridging the miles. June, settled into a junior role at a firm designing eco-homes, brought her girlfriend, a botanist named Lila, with a laugh like wind chimes and a knack for rare orchids, into their fold, the backyard feasts expanding to include her stories of high desert blooms. Bonds deepened without erasure. Riley's mother lived in anecdotes shared over wine, her wild spirit invoked in toasts to fierce hearts. Winter solstice had passed into a spring of milestones. Riley's first solo exhibit at a Pearl District gallery, Walls alive with canvases of intertwined figures against Oregon's vast skies. Evelyn's pride evident in the way she lingered before each piece, eyes tracing the lines as if reading their love anew. The opening night buzzed with energy, critics murmuring of lyrical vulnerability, friends clinking glasses, her father cornering a collector with uncharacteristic zeal. But it was Evelyn's hand in hers, slipped through the crowd to the alley behind, where they kissed under the neon hum that made it eternal. "You built this," Evelyn whispered, forehead to hers. From the depths. Summer beckoned with festivals, the waterfront blues, where they danced to soulful horns, bodies swaying in the throng. The Shakespeare in the park, Evelyn reciting Ophelia under star-pricked canopies, Riley sketching her in moonlight. Their love, once a fragile seedling, now a sturdy arbor, sheltered others. Mentoring young artists at community centers, Evelyn's workshops blooming into a co-op where fibers met paint, threads of story weaving lives. Yet light's fullness invited reflection on the journey's arc. From the rain-lashed doorway of invitation, hands tentative over fairy lights, to this verdant now, where every touch was testament. One golden afternoon as they canoed the Clackamas River, oars dipping in unison, Riley voiced it. "That first day decorating the guest room, I came broken, Evelyn. You saw the pieces and didn't look away." Paddling to a gravel bar, they beached the boat, stretching limbs languid in the heat, the waters murmur a lullaby. Evelyn traced Riley's palm, reading its lines as her mother once taught. "We all come broken, but together, we rebuild into something luminous." Her kiss followed, sun-warmed and deep, bodies reclining on the shore as dragonflies skimmed the surface, iridescent harbingers. As evening draped the canyon in indigo, they floated homeward, the current carrying them effortlessly. Riley's heart, once a storm-tossed vessel, now sailed steady, carrying not just survival, but a legacy of light. To forgive the fractures, to empathize with the flawed, to love as salvation's quiet river. In the years unfolding like endless petals, they would face new weathers, tempests of time, gales of change, but rooted in this rebirth they endured. Portland's rains would fall, bridges stand resilient, and in each other's gaze the deepest truth. What they built was not mere decoration, but a life tender, profound, eternal in its glow.